Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Chris Rhodes. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer and an MVP, and I'm here today to talk to you about a brand new exam, MS-100, which is the Microsoft 365 Identity and Services exam. And I'm really excited to unpack everything that's inside of here. We've got lots of information to give you. This is all brand new certifications, brand new exams this week. So we're really happy to be able to unpack some of that, give you some pointers from where you guys can go and start learning about this straight away as soon as you finish. So today's session, let's have a quick look at what we're going to go through today. First of all, we're going to have an overview of certification. Lots of things have changed actually very recently this week, so we want to talk about some of those things. We're going to go into an overview of exams in general and then deep dive into the objective domain areas that are covered on this exam. So we want you to have a lot of information to take from that so you can go away and start studying and start looking at the technologies. We'll also give you some tips on how to prepare for this exam and what steps you should be taking next. The key takeaways for you are you should be getting into that rhythm of preparation after this. You should be looking at aligning where you need to study. So you might pick up on some things this week, today that you maybe already know. Perhaps you know identity really well. So maybe that's not your first priority when it comes to study. So you want to pick up on those things as we go along and make some notes. We also want to give you some study material pointers, some links, some resources, and also a breakdown of some of the exam topics. And I've made up some practice questions. So pay attention. I will be asking questions as we go along. Let's start with certification, and let's go into an overview of this for you, because this is brand new this week. We've just announced that there are 2 new certifications in this space. So let's spend a moment having a look at those. First of all, at the moment, we have announced that there's the Modern Desktop Administrator certification, I beg your pardon. That's going to be coming soon. We don't have an awful lot to say about it at this point in time, except for this is an associate level certification. Okay? We're building this out. We just wanted to give you an insight onto that, so you've got a heads up at this early stage. We're only just announcing it this week. But there will be exams, there will be a certification you can get on Modern Desktop. The main thing we're talking about today, though, is the Microsoft 365 Enterprise Administrator. Right now, this exam doesn't exist, but training does already. And we know what the exam is going to look like because we're going to tell you that today. So you can't take the test as soon as this session finishes. You're going to have to wait a little while. We're expecting November for that exam to land in beta. So you can begin thinking about studying now. You've got a few weeks to go away, watch back some of the sessions, attend more sessions while you're here at Ignite to start filling in those knowledge gaps. So when that exam lands, you're ready to roll. You can be the first people to have passed that exam. Now let me just kind of put that into perspective for you, because we've announced quite a few exams this week. Azure particularly, there's lots of those. And this particular 2 that we're talking about then, I just wanted to kind of set the scene, because there's these 2 levels, associate and expert. And for you to be a Microsoft 365 Enterprise Administrator and to get that expert certification, you also need to take an associate level certification along the way. So at this point in time, we've only announced Modern Desktop in that space, but there are more roles identified to come. Okay. And I want to spend a moment just explaining about how we got here. So a few months ago, Microsoft decided to reimagine how not just certification, but training looks based upon people's job roles. So Microsoft got a bunch of subject matter experts together in a room and said, hey, what does a Microsoft 365 Enterprise Administrator actually do in their job? So after much consternation and analysis, we came up with a job role. Okay, so I just want to explain what that is so you've got really an idea for where the job analysis has come from. So let's take a look. What exactly is a Microsoft 365 Enterprise Administrator? So the subject matter expert said it is as follows. A Microsoft 365 Enterprise Administrator takes part in evaluating, planning, migrating, deploying and managing M365 services. They perform M365 tenant management tasks for an enterprise, including its identities, security, compliance, and supporting technologies. Candidates for these exams have a working knowledge of M365 workloads and should have been an administrator for at least one of those M365 workloads. And when we say workloads, we're talking about things like Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Skype for Business, Windows, as examples. Candidates also have a working knowledge of networking, server administration, and IT fundamentals such as DNS, Active Directory, and PowerShell. So this is a new job role. We haven't defined this ever before. Maybe this job role exists in your organization right now, but for many of you, it won't. This is new. We're only announcing it now. And for many organizations, they're only just starting to adopt M365, or they're planning to do that in the next 6 months, 12 months, perhaps. So maybe this is a job role for you that doesn't exist at work yet, but maybe you're going to create that. Maybe your company's going to be taking out M365 subscriptions and therefore will adopt this. We're very early in this cycle for some of you here. So is anybody already regarding themselves as an M365, an enterprise administrator in their workplace? A quick show of hands. Several of you already. Okay, good for you. So you are on that crest of the wave that we're rolling out. So good for you. So let's talk about how you can start preparing. Some of you will want to start studying immediately, I hope. So we've got a learning path already that helps you to get where you want to be. So that place you want to be is on the right. That's the M365 Certified Enterprise Administrator. You will need to take 2 exams. Today we're analyzing the MS-100 exam. Yesterday we went through the MS-101. If you missed that, that's of course recorded. You can watch that back as well. You'll need both of these exams together, for which you'll get a badge for each one, to put together to get that certification at the end. So the kinds of things that we're going to be having courses on that you guys will either take as online courses, as instructor-led courses, maybe as Pluralsight or LinkedIn learning courses. You'll be looking at courses based upon tenant and service management, identity management, and Office 365 management. This week, we've actually announced that there are courses already available for these. You can actually start going to learning partners. You can start studying for this. These courses are actually out now. So let's go into exams in a bit more detail and talk about the objective domains as well as we go through. But if you have any questions regarding this, we'll take questions at the end. But please also see my colleagues on the Learn booth on the Expo Hall. We can discuss this in way greater detail with you one-to-one as well. So let's talk about exams then. Who's taken an exam in the last, say, 2 years, 18 months, 2 years? Quick show of hands there. About a third to a half of you. Okay. So things will have changed. If you didn't take an exam since NT4 or Windows 95, well, let's go over some basics for you because things have changed a little bit. We want to fill you in. Exams nowadays follow a set pattern. You're going to get between 40 and 60 questions. That's going to vary a little bit depending on the type of exam, the type of technology, but just to give you a rough idea. Not all questions will necessarily be weighted exactly the same. Some questions are more complex. We may ask you to maybe answer a question that has various different moving parts to that. So maybe you have to drag and drop 4 or 5 things and put them in an order. Maybe some of those we give more points to because they're more complex. And there's a higher chance that you could get that wrong than just a straightforward multiple choice. So we want to reward you for that if you've got all of them correct in the correct sequence. The one thing I do tell people when I'm informing students is, please just answer every question. Make sure you've given yourself enough time because you don't get negative marks. Anything you put down can only help. If you're not sure, take a guess. I don't want you to guess. I want you to be informed. I want you to be knowledgeable. I want you to be a qualified person that knows what they're doing. But if time's running out, if you're not exactly sure, please don't leave it blank. Put something down. It cannot harm you. It doesn't count against you in any way. You can also use the review screen at the end. As you go along your test, you can mark items for review, so you can come back at the end of that section or the end of the test and come back and go over those once more if you're not quite sure. Most exams have a 3-hour appointment window. Sometimes it's less, but plan for that. That's the kind of time you want to spend out at the office at the test center, or if you're doing remote proctored exams, that's a time you need to set aside from beginning to end. And that's involving the registration process, checking you in, but also giving you enough time to complete any comments at the end of the test as well. The reality is you're not going to be using all of that time for answering questions. Okay, so the actual question time is about half an hour less than the overall time, so approximately 150 minutes. Nowadays, we don't just have multiple choice exam questions. They're great, we love those, but we like to spice things up. We like to have a variety of different question types, partly to help prevent piracy, but also to keep things interesting for you while you're doing that test. We don't want you to nod off halfway through. So we have things like build list questions. Drag these steps over to the right and put them in the right sequence. Maybe use drag and drop. You know, bring across the right technology to the right solution by drag and drop. We also have hot areas where you might click on something. One thing we're going to talk about in a second is performance-based testing, which is new. A lot of exams, particularly at expert level, will have case studies. Case studies present a scenario to you. They tell you all about a company, what they have already in their existing environment, what they're planning to do, and also things like technical and business requirements. And you will assimilate all of that information and then answer a series of questions based on those. And those are usually time blocked in a separate sense. So you're still doing it as part of the overall exam, but you might get a time allocation just for that, and you're treating that as a distinct, almost like a mini test within the exam. The great thing about those, why we like those as candidates and also as people scoring this, is they check an overall understanding of the technology. You haven't just memorized a single fact. You've had to analyze a scenario and apply your knowledge of the technologies to present a solution that works for that specific scenario, that specific case study. So in that sense, it represents quite a good way of testing you. And also, I think for me anyway, as a test taker, it kind of makes things more interesting. Let's talk about that new technology we've just introduced. Starting this very week, we now have performance-based testing coming into all new exams, or at least as part of their tracks. This is brand new. I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but you're starting to be able to take the tests on the Azure tracks this week, and ultimately the M365 exams will also have these as well. And so what exactly is a performance-based test? Well, as part of your exam, you'll go into an environment that is spun up for you. You'll connect to a situation. Maybe that's Azure, maybe that's M365. You'll connect to a virtual machine that has a web browser. You'll go into that web browser. You'll connect to the relevant portal. So in our case here, in this screenshot, it's the Azure portal. And then you'll be given a series of tasks that you can see down the right-hand side. Those tasks will ask you to accomplish certain goals, but we don't mind how you do that. In the example of Azure, maybe you use the Azure portal itself. Maybe you go off into Cloud Shell and use PowerShell or CLI. We really don't mind how you do that. What we do want to know is that you got to the right goal, and we'll assess that. So we're not too fussy about which buttons you press to get there or how long it took you to get there. We just want to make sure that the end state looks like the scenario we've asked you to complete. And that's going to be marked all along the way as part of your exam. A lot of people have been asking for this for some years, in fact. They want to be able to demonstrate their hands-on knowledge. Not everybody can memorize where things are in a UI. So this way, we get to test you and say, maybe you can't remember. It doesn't matter. You'll find it. Maybe you click 3 or 4 buttons until you get to where you want. We don't mind how many times you click. As long as you get to the end point, that's all we're worried about here. So you can expect to get one of these performance-based tests as part of an exam track. So maybe you'll get it on the MS-100, maybe you'll get it on the MS-101, maybe you'll get it on both. I don't know yet. But you'll certainly expect to see this at least once. And when you do an exam, you'll typically get at least 2 labs to do as part of that overall exam. So maybe you get 2 of these on your MS-100 exam, perhaps. And you get something between 7 and 9 tasks to complete. Let's talk about exam scoring. All exams are standardized insofar as they are marked out of 1,000 points. And you're always required to get 700 points out of 1,000 in order to pass. That's the sort of passing score. But behind the scenes, there's what we call a cut score here. So when this goes into beta, we have a look at how people are getting on with that. And if perhaps it's turning out to be a really, really tough exam, perhaps the cut score is maybe 65, 70%. If it's something that people are getting done really, really easily, maybe the cut score is 80%, 85%. Who knows? So we never really see that. I have no idea what those cut scores are. But all I know is when I go into that test, I need to be coming out with at least 700 on my score report. Okay? And that's the same. They've standardized that across all tests. And that wasn't always the way. So again, a couple of tips. There are no points deducted for wrong answers. But if you leave something blank, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to earn any points for that particular question. So it totally makes sense to have a go, have a guess if you're not sure. Also, try and be methodical. I don't like personally hopping backwards and forwards too much because it wastes time. Put an answer down and move on. Your gut reaction is typically the right answer. Put it down. If you start double checking yourself, often you talk yourself out of it. The exam questions are not meant to trick you, so the more time you spend looking at it, sometimes you're talking yourself out of what was the right answer in the first place. So if you're not sure, put your gut reaction down and then move on to the next question is my advice. So exam question structure. Exam questions are written to a specific DNA. We have a structure to this. It's very standardized. The language is standardized. And once you know that language, it actually helps you because you spend less time looking at the unnecessary words and getting more to the words that are actually relevant to the question in hand. So let's take a look at what an exam question looks like. There's always the setup at the beginning, which spells out what the environment or what the scenario looks like. You're a developer at Contoso. You develop applications that do blah, blah, blah. It's going to be something like that at the top that gives you the big picture first. We then give you a problem statement. Something's not working. Something's not connecting correctly. There's some kind of problem statement here that we want you to understand about that scenario. So things may be not correct, something you need to configure. So then we give you a goal statement. You need to fix the problem. You need to recommend a solution that will fix the problem. Okay? But that structure that we've got, that goal statement, is what you're focusing on when you're answering the question. Your answer must meet the goal statement. So we don't care what's a best practice. We don't care what you do back at your place of work. What you do in your job might be a bit different. We want you to complete the task that the goal statement says, irrespective of what you would normally do. Maybe you're configuring X, but normally at work you configure Y. Well, we're asking you to configure X. So you've got to look at that goal statement very carefully to understand problems, how you're fixing the problem or recommending a solution. Okay? So the final thing as part of the question is, what should you do? What should you recommend? What solution would you recommend? It's that kind of phraseology. Hopefully that sounds familiar to some of you that have taken exams. Right, so let's move on to the next section then. Let's deep dive then on the MS-100 exam itself. We'll spend the bulk of our time together looking at that now. The exam objective domain is made up out of 4 functional groups. And I've put on here the relative weightings for those as well. So they're about, no, they're not equal at all, are they? So the first section's worth between 25 and 30%, 35 to 40 on the next one, and then it's smaller on the last one. So you want to sort of spend your time studying appropriately. For example, at the bottom here, plan M365 workloads and applications is only 10 to 15%. So you want to spend 10 to 15% of your study time on that. Overwhelming too much in one area is going to perhaps lose you marks in the others. You've got to kind of study appropriately. Okay, so what are the 4 areas? So first of all, we've got design and implement Microsoft 365 services. I'm going to break that down for you in a minute. We then have manage user identity and roles, manage access and authentication, and then that final one, plan M365 workloads and applications. Now, before we deep dive, just one little slide I want to sneak in here to kind of set the scene. If you're not super familiar with M365, maybe you've already done parts of this already, maybe you're a Windows 10 expert, maybe you're an Office 365 expert. What does M365 look like as a solution? Let's have a quick look at the technology here. There are 3 main pillars: Windows 10, Office 365, and also enterprise mobility and security. M365 is a combination of all of those together, plus a bunch of other technology underneath as well. So we've got Azure information protection, we've got cloud app security, we've got Intune. So it's a combination of different components, and the key thing is they're working together. They are integrated, okay? So we need you to think like that as an M365 enterprise administrator. You should have knowledge of all of these things. And what you have to also have knowledge of is the workloads that comprise these. So, for instance, if we look at Office 365 there, as you probably know, Office 365 is made up of a bunch of different technologies: Exchange, SharePoint, Skype for Business, Teams. You need to have a good working knowledge of those, but you're not necessarily an expert in every single area. Okay? But you need to have that top-level knowledge of how M365 subscription touches those things and the kinds of things that this job role is going to get involved in. But also, likewise, there are going to be some things that are going to be more specialized. Maybe your Exchange administrator does Exchange tasks on a day-to-day level, but there might be some things that have to be done by the enterprise admin for Exchange to work. So we've got to kind of know where we sit in that big picture here. We're almost like that. We are the global admin. We're literally the global admin managing all of those things, but we may have help along the way by our workload administrators too. Okay, so let's go down into that first area then. Okay, I think I've covered that one. Yep, you don't need to know all of the depth of them, just how they interrelate, and in most cases, the top-level configurations. So let's go into design and implement Microsoft 365 services. Let's go deeper in that, explain and expand upon that functional group. And the first part inside of here is managing domains. Now, maybe some of you have managed domains under Office 365. This will feel quite familiar. Maybe you've done this under Azure Active Directory. Some of these tasks, maybe you've already got experience with from working on those technologies previously. Good for you. Maybe you're already partway there then. But the kinds of tasks we need you to be aware of as an M365 enterprise admin are adding those additional domains and doing any other configuration that might come with those. So maybe that's integrating it into SharePoint, integrating it into Exchange, and so forth. Not just adding it once in the M365 Admin Center. There's going to be other tie-in tasks that you do as well along the way. So I've got a few screenshots here to give you some ideas. I've got here several domains. I've blanked them out because these are my own. I've got an onmicrosoft.com domain name, but I've got a bunch of others. So there's various different statuses for these. Some of these are set up complete. Some of these are set up in progress. I need to do other things here on some of those domain names to make them fully work and to be fully integrated with Office 365. So we always get an onmicrosoft.com domain to start with, but in this case I've added several other custom domain names to that interface as well, but I haven't finished off on some of those tasks. So, you don't need to tell me now, but you've got to think, what are those other tasks? What things do I need to do to make setup complete on all of those? You also need to bring in domains too. So when you add a new domain, you've got to verify you own it. You can't just add in any old domain name. You have to have one that you actually own, and you have to prove ownership. Okay, and that helps you along that way of starting to get that ball rolling that you can then finish off with the other screen I showed you. Also in this area, we need to plan an M365 implementation. Remember, this is an expert level certification, so there's going to be elements of design here. We're not just going to rush in, set up a subscription, press 4 buttons and walk away. We're going to actually spend a lot of time offline thinking first, planning first, thinking about which services will we enable, how will we enable them, how does that relate to what we already have. Maybe we've got a bunch of on-premises technologies already, like Exchange and SharePoint. How do we get those moved up to the cloud? How do we get their data and the users moved up to the cloud? There's a lot of planning involved in that process. So I've taken a screenshot here actually from docs.microsoft.com. I would definitely urge you to go do a lot of reading on there, whether you're doing this for an actual project or for study or for both, because it outlines everything you need to know before you begin. You don't just rush in and press buttons and buy subscriptions. You've got to do a lot of analysis here. What ports do I need to open? What considerations do I have to have as an administrator? And there is a logical flow to this that you can see on the screen. So first of all, you've got to think about the networking, the bandwidth, the ports that you need to open. That's kind of fairly logical and straightforward. But then you go into things like identity. I can't really set up services in the cloud until we've got users to consume those services. So I've got to think about my identity story. Am I cloud only? Maybe my company has never had any on-premises. We're a brand new greenfield organization. Maybe we've never set up identities in Active Directory before. But there's a very good chance that most of you will have that. So you've got to think about creating hybrid identity models that work for you. A lot of that is involved in the planning process. So again, please look at docs.microsoft.com. It's the most useful resource ever. Everything is the source of good information from this place for sure. And for each of those areas, you can drill down. There are guides, then there are lots of pointers. This is a great place for study. If it's not on here, it's probably not worth knowing. But certainly from this objective area, this is a very rich resource area for you guys to go and look at. Some of you may not actually be doing this. Maybe somebody else has already set this up in your organization, or maybe you're a year away from even contemplating doing this at work, and you want to get the study done and the certification done first so that when you do implement this at work, you're doing it in a knowledgeable way. Okay, so there's plenty you can be doing reading up ahead for free. Tons of resources here. Next up, setting up a tenancy and a subscription. Also, know what these things mean. What is a tenant? How do I set up a subscription? What do I do inside of there? How do I allocate licenses to folks? How do I monitor those licenses that were allocated so that we're spending money the right way and we've given people the right features that they need to do their jobs? Does everybody need enterprise mobility and security? Does everybody need Office 365 E5 to do their jobs? We need to work out what their user requirements are and monitor that we've given out the right licenses to the right folks and they're being used efficiently. Maybe you've got an Office 365 subscription. Many people will fall into that category. You can upgrade out of that into a Microsoft 365 subscription. So maybe that's where you're starting from. So how do we do that? How do we step up from an Office 365 subscription to an M365 one? Okay. So licenses. Well, licenses we can allocate per person. In this case, maybe I'm adding a Windows or an Office 365 license to this individual. This is an identity that's already in Azure Active Directory, and I can assign licenses individually, but I can also do that in bulk. And for larger organizations, we'll want to know that you can do that. This is an enterprise admin role. We want to do this not necessarily person by person, but for a whole bunch of people in one go, maybe thousands of people in one go. Okay? And also, folks, be aware of the responsibility areas. We're assuming you're that global admin. That's actually a role, okay? That's actually a role that's specified. Somebody, at least one person in the organization has to be the global admin. You can designate other people to be global admins as well. But we don't want too many people having that responsibility. But we also have to think about individual workload responsibilities. So for example here, we've got Skype for Business Administrator, Password Administrator, Exchange Administrator. We've very much got to think about how we tie in to other people in our organization and that we assign them the appropriate roles so they can do their jobs. So get familiar with those and where you set them. We also are in charge, as an enterprise administrator, of managing the subscription and managing service health. So if there's any problems, say, in the cloud, and there's an issue with something, that might well have a knock-on effect to what my administrators are wanting to do. If we're trying to configure Exchange Online, but there's actually a service health issue with Exchange Online, maybe we're the people that would know about that first, and we might in turn then pass that information down to our Exchange administrators. So the kinds of things that are involved in this space are also not just monitoring for service problems, but actually maybe creating a service request. Maybe it's not been recognized that there's a service outage. Maybe the first person to recognize that. You might be responsible for creating that service request to Microsoft to say, hey, we're having some issues today. We can't do some Exchange tasks. And you may be the person to log that in your organization. Okay? So in the Admin Center, there's an area just for that. So we can see in this case, in this screenshot I've taken, that there are some advisory notices against some of the online services. So we can see in this case Exchange Online and Office 365 Portal both have an advisory against those, that we might be the person responsible for checking those out and seeing what impact that may or may not have to our organization. Because we're looking after the holistic picture here, we may have a better bird's eye view of that than the individual workload administrators do. We also need to be looking at planning user and data migration. And that's a big element if you actually do this for a living. This is a big project in its own right. How do I get my users that are on premises into the cloud, and how do I get their data to follow them? Hands up who's actually done that before. A good half of you. Excellent. Well done. Okay, so the kinds of things we want to look at here are what kinds of data sources can we take up to the cloud? In this example here, I'm looking at data migration, which is in the admin center. I could migrate people's PST files or their SharePoint sites or their Exchange mailboxes. There's lots of different ways to do this. And also, folks, you need to know what tools would you then use to get that done. Is it some PowerShell? Is there a tool I download? Okay, I'm not going to give you all of the answers right here, but these are the things you need to investigate, because it's also about picking the right tool for the job. Do I manage a mailbox migration for 10,000 users by moving individually their PST files, or am I likely to do that in batch? Well, probably the latter. So find out how you do that. What are the tools involved in that process? So let's see who was paying attention. Here's a practice question. These practice questions, just to give you an idea, are some that I just made up specifically for this presentation. So I have no idea what's in the MS-100 exam. It's not out yet. I just made these up just for you folks here. So what's your answer, guys? You've got an M365 subscription. You plan to add a custom domain to your subscription. You need to ensure that the custom domain can be verified using DNS. Which record type can you add? TXT, you say. Okay. Let's see if you're right. You are correct. Well done. Thank you for paying attention. Now, notice the structure of this question. Does this structure look familiar? Hopefully, I wrote it according to the specification earlier on. You've got that overarching statement up top. You've got the big picture. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. We're telling you what you're going to do next. You plan to add a custom domain to your subscription. You need to, okay? And then finally, what should you do? What record should you create? So there's that structure that we talked about, that anatomy of a sample question. Hopefully I've written it to standard, I hope. Okay, more of those to come later. Let's move to the next section. So the next section here is managing user identity and roles. And this is actually a pretty big area. Big in terms of the percentages on the test as well. So a very rich area. There's lots of tasks here for a global admin to do both on premises and inside of admin centers too. So the first one we will need to look at here is designing an identity strategy. There's lots of different ways to do things. Are we cloud only? We don't have any on-premises users. Do we have Active Directory? Are we going to be federating with Azure Active Directory? Or are we doing something else? Okay, are we doing synchronization of accounts? If so, what kind of synchronization? Are there any conditions that are preventing us doing things the way we want? Maybe we don't like passwords to be stored in the cloud. So which of the solutions would give us that solution perhaps? So we've got to know that. We've got to know what our business requirements are, what we're hoping to get out of this. Do we need things like single sign-on for applications? There's lots of different ways to accomplish this, and none of those is necessarily right or wrong every single time. It's going to be based on the business requirements of that specific scenario. Okay, so in the case of hybrid identity, here's some examples here. You could use password hash, you could use pass-through authentication, you could use federation, and some of those have seamless SSO that you can add on to those as well. Okay, but again, know what's involved in that process. How would you set that up? What tools do you have to use, like Azure AD Connect? How do you configure Azure AD Connect? All of that is involved in this job role. You are the person who's making the decisions. Maybe you're not necessarily pressing the buttons, but you're doing the planning, the designing for this. So you've got to be recommending whoever ends up doing this, they are pressing the right buttons. They're making the choices that you've already scoped out for them. Because these are quite important things to get right. I think you'll agree if you've ever done this before. You don't want to make the wrong choice here because it might end up with your users having all kinds of authentication headaches. Okay. So planning identity synchronization, we've called that one out. We've called out the tool here as well in this area. We expect you to know the tool Azure AD Connect. Hands up who's used that before. 75% of you at least. Okay, awesome, well done. But maybe you only ran it once, because when you've done it, you only did it for your company, a specific way. Go back and check it again and see what other options there are inside of there that you didn't pick when you ran this at work. You've also got to know how to do things like federation as well, even if you didn't do that yourselves, if that wasn't required. It's still a possible scenario. In the big scheme of things, federation is getting less and less important because we've got things like pass-through authentication, which lots of companies are going for now, but there's still a very good business case for that. Please don't disregard that, even if you went a different way yourselves. In fact, if you look on docs.microsoft.com, there's a very good learning tool that helps people make a decision which way you're going to go. Are you going to go federation? Are you going to go seamless SSO? Please don't memorize this now, but that's taken from docs.microsoft.com, and it walks you through all the different choices. Okay, so I'd recommend you go through that and you understand, if I'm doing this, I should make this choice. And then the second choice is based upon this requirement. Please have a look at that, because it helps you properly understand all the different hybrid identity choices that are out there. And also, tacked on with the last one, we also need to manage the synchronization that Azure AD Connect does for us. So where do we go to check it's working healthy? Where are the reports? How do I know it synced successfully last time around? Or if it didn't sync successfully, what are the errors? Where do I find those errors? Do I look inside of Azure Active Directory online, or do I look inside the tool on the local computer on the network, or both? You've got to have an awareness of those things, because again, this is something that's really only done once for the organization. All right, so you've got to be the person who's responsible for that as the enterprise admin. Also, please consider things like password sync. Do we want passwords synced to the cloud, or password hashes really synced to the cloud, or not? Some people have a hard time with that, and they say, no, we don't want any passwords or their hashes stored in the cloud whatsoever. So you've got to look at solutions that enable that to still happen and still have hybrid identity. Also understand multi-forest scenarios. Some companies are really complicated. They have more than one domain. They have more than one forest. Maybe they've been through some acquisitions and they've ended up with like 3 forests with 20 domains. How do we synchronize that? Does that mean we have 20 tenants or 1 tenant? How do we do that? Okay. So look into those scenarios as well, even if that's not something you've personally had experience with. Could come up as an exam question. Okay. For a lot of the things I've mentioned, but not all of them, you can get this type of information online. So this particular screenshot is not taken from the M365 Admin Center, but as you can see in the top left, this is actually taken from the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. So yes, you will need good awareness of what is where do I find certain things, which admin consoles do I use. There's a good half dozen or so, I haven't counted that precisely, but there's a good half dozen and maybe more admin centers that you should have a working knowledge of. And definitely Azure Active Directory is one of those. There are certain things you can only do in here. You cannot do in that M365 Admin Center. So checking on identity sync is one of those. We also need you to know about how to manage Azure AD identities as well. Now, some of this is straightforward, setting up users, managing user accounts, resetting passwords. Some of that's relatively straightforward, but also equally, there are some other choices you can make. When we set up groups these days, there's like 4 different choices when you set up a group. There's an Office 365 group, there's a security group, there's a mail-enabled group, and I've forgotten what the last one is. There's 4 different kinds, and they have different things they do. Maybe you use the same kind all of the time, but each of them has their own particular nuances that you've got to have awareness of. So when you're setting up a group, is it always going to be an Office 365 group or something else? Okay, you've got to think about that, and what is that group intended to be used for? Is it just going to be used in Office 365 for a distribution list? Or is it going to be used for security permissions inside a SharePoint as well? You've got to know when to create each kind. We've also got some things in here like assigning licenses. I talked about that before. There's a bit of an overlap here. But also things like bulk user management. Maybe you want to change something across all of your user accounts en masse in one big bulk operation. Maybe you want to turn on MFA for all of your users. We've also got things like access reviews. So we can do checks to see automated checks for group memberships. We've got maybe a security sensitive group and we need to really regulate the membership of that group and we need to have that checked every week, every month. Maybe somebody needs to be emailed to say, please validate the membership of this group is still good. You can do that inside of access reviews. So I definitely encourage you to play around with some of those features inside of Azure AD. Okay, so here we go. In terms of groups, you know, there are some easy points that you can get on exams, sometimes for just knowing the basics. Some of you may not be implementing this, but you have to have the design decisions in your head. You have to know, why would somebody create a security group? Why would someone create an Office 365 group? Maybe you're not the person actually doing it though, but you should be setting the guidance for your organization as the enterprise admin, setting the direction of why we do these a certain way. And access reviews I just talked about here. So in this case here, I've got a group called Executive Group. This is a group, obviously, that has executives in it. So I really want to make sure that it only contains executives and that group membership is good. So I've set up here a monthly task to check on the membership there. And maybe the group owner is emailed. Maybe this is something they need to do on a monthly basis to validate that that group membership is still good. And maybe we've got automated procedures in there to get rid of people who are no longer valid. Then we have user roles. There are lots and lots of user roles. It is a bit of a challenge, but try and get familiar with them, because when you've got somebody who's going to be helping you look after all of this big estate, you're not going to give them global admin. Not many people are going to have that. You will, as the M365 Enterprise Admin, one or two others. But there's a whole range of other roles that you can assign to people to give them delegated responsibilities inside of your subscription. We've also got roles-based access control with Azure Active Directory too. So there's a couple of areas that you've got to be familiar with when it comes to assigning permissions, assigning roles. There's several different places you can set this. So I've got an example of one of those here. This is actually in the Office 365 area under security and compliance. So there are some permissions. So kind of know the difference between permissions and roles as well. These are permissions that we can assign to people. And these are kind of like combinations. So when we look at compliance administrator in this case, on the right-hand side, you can see it's made up of a bunch of different roles. And we've got about a dozen or so in view there on the bottom right-hand corner. We also need to be mindful that we're not over-empowering people. We're giving them the right roles, the right permissions to do the job we've asked them to do without going too far. Okay? We don't need everybody to be a global admin. Of course, that's obvious when I say that out loud. So what exactly do I give to other people? Depends on their jobs, depends on their workloads that they manage. Okay, now with that in mind, let's have a look at a practice question and see what you come up with for this one. This is a pretty tough one. Let's see what you get. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You plan to delegate permissions to your mail administrators so that they can perform tasks in the Security and Compliance Center. So again, that's another one of those admin areas. You need to ensure that the delegation does not allow the mail administrators to perform tasks beyond Exchange Online services in your subscription. What should you recommend? I'm hearing A overwhelmingly there. Let's see if you're right. It's actually B. Okay, so mail flow is to do with Exchange connectors and mail flow, but actually organization is the right answer. Don't worry, it's okay. You're not in the real test right now. You can make mistakes, it's fine. Now you know there's things you need to brush up on. Understand the permissions, understand the roles. Some of these names don't jump out at you as being the product specific thing. You probably picked mail flow because it had the word mail in it, right? But actually, organization is a term we use in Exchange quite a lot. Your Exchange entity is called your Exchange organization. Who knew? Well, I did. Don't worry. It's all about learning today. So let's look at the next section then. Third one here is called Managing Access and Authentication. So we've talked about users and groups and identity sync. Here we're looking at things like setting up authentication settings, and onwards we'll talk about things like MFA as well. So here we're responsible for like, what authentication method do we want? How are people going to be authenticating? Are they going to be using a user principal name? Is that the same name that they use on premises to connect to cloud-based services? In fact, do we do single sign-on with that, or seamless single sign-on with that, so that they can access their cloud applications using the exact same logon that they connected to their on-premises computer with? If you want those kinds of things, you've got to know how to do that. There's lots of design choices around this. But also, we've got to think about other day-to-day things with authentication. So in this case, we're looking at password protection settings that are inside of Azure Active Directory. So we can put on here things like passwords we don't want users to be able to use. Maybe we don't want to have our company name used as a password. Or there are passwords people commonly use in your organization. You want to ban those to make it more secure. Okay, there's lots you can do here. There's also password protection on Active Directory. We can also decide whether we're actually enforcing this or purely just auditing on this, so that we can build up a picture of the things people are doing with a view to maybe making a more tougher policy a little bit later on. Multi-factor authentication. I see this being used more and more by organizations now, and it definitely is very easy to do now with M365 and Azure Active Directory. People need an app, a phone, a text message to be able to do multi-factor authentication, and users typically have those things in their hand, in their mobile phone. So designing a solution involves things like, well, do we have those devices? What users need this? For what applications? Is it for all applications or just some applications? Maybe it's just for administrators. Maybe end users don't need this. Maybe it's just for people like me. When I'm inside of some of those admin consoles, I need to have multi-factor authentication because I'm a global admin. And we don't want to have my privilege being used by somebody who saw me typing a password. If I've got MFA as well, then just if they happen to see my password, then that's not going to be good enough. They're not going to break into my account that way. They also need to have my access token too. So administering the users, enabling them, disabling them for MFA, these are some of your tasks. And designing solutions where you need this. So we know we can do it, but like, how and why do you want to do that? Is it for all apps, some users? Okay, so in this case here, we're reporting on who's been enabled, and we could actually go in here and enable this for users too. So for the user we've got highlighted right now, we could just go ahead and enable it as a one-off per person. But again, find out how to do this kind of thing in bulk. In the real world, we probably are not going to be setting this person by person. Also, application access. Nowadays, we're using cloud apps, or we're using apps that we want to present in the cloud that might actually be on premises. So we've got to know how to register apps in Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. Things like Office apps will typically be available to users as icons inside of myapps.microsoft.com, for example. How do we present that to them? Are they getting that through an app on their phone? Are they going to a web URL? Do we want them to see that? Do we want to present other apps in there as well? Maybe we use Twitter. Maybe we use Dropbox. Maybe we want to have those kind of applications in and amongst those as well, and present a whole suite of applications to folks and show them icons for those. We can also add in on-premises-based apps. So in this case here, we're adding an app that lives on-prem, and we're presenting it to people as a cloud app. But we haven't put the app in the cloud. We're just making effectively a shortcut to that by creating what's called an application proxy. So the application proxy talks back to the on-premises server where the application is physically hosted, but presents it as a cloud application to users. Has anyone done that before? Oh, wow, more than I thought. Good, about 5–10% of you. Awesome. Okay. We also got to think about bringing in external users. These days, we like to collaborate with partners more and more. We like to work with more than one organization, not just our own. So how do we do that? Are we going to set up accounts for those people? Do we set up perhaps a new Azure AD tenant and set up B2B accounts for those people? Or do we do things like creating guest accounts? So if you look on this picture here at the top, you can add users to your local directory, but you can also add guest users in there for folks that actually exist inside of Azure Active Directory in other tenants, so that those people are still responsible for managing those identities and those passwords, but you're adding them in here. You're being able to add them as guests so that you can then allocate permissions to SharePoint sites or other resources inside of your M365 space. And this is, an important thing going forward, sharing to partners, collaborating. Okay, so on that very theme, here's a question. Your company has a Microsoft 365 subscription with cloud-only user accounts. Your company works with a partner organization. The partner organization users sign in with a logon format of user@partner.onmicrosoft.com. You plan to provide access to some of your resources in SharePoint Online. You need to ensure that the partners can successfully access the SharePoint resources. Your solution must only allow the partner organization to manage passwords for the partner user accounts. What should you include in your recommendation? Someone says C. Someone else said C as well. And you are correct, guest accounts. Okay, so a couple of clues in there. We said cloud-only user accounts, so you don't have any synchronized accounts. All of your accounts are in Azure AD, and that's all you have. The partner, well, if you know a little bit about Azure AD, that domain name should have been familiar to you, sort of telegraphing the fact that they're also an Azure AD tenant. When you have a domain of something.onmicrosoft.com, you're an Azure AD tenant, so you'll have your own identities in there too. So this is a classic case of giving guest access. You want to give those partner folks access to some of your SharePoint resources. You don't want to be responsible for managing their usernames and passwords. They've already got them. We've told you that up top. They've got accounts. You've got accounts. You're two separate companies. You each want to manage your own accounts. Guest account is the right answer. Well done, those that said C. Okay, final area, guys, and then we've got a few wrap-up things after this. Plan M365 workloads and applications. So now we've got to start thinking a little bit more about those workloads, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and start having a little bit of knowledge on those, because there are going to be massive overlaps between what they need when they're doing hybrid deployments and what you are provisioning for them. So for example, I was working with a customer recently where we did a hybrid Exchange deployment. We had to set up the identity first before we could set up the Exchange hybrid. So you've got to know like the order of work there. You've also got to know, as the M365 Enterprise admin, what you need to do versus what the Exchange administrator or the SharePoint administrator needs to enable. Maybe you're wearing both hats, but you've got to know what you've got to do first to enable that workload to be configured, and what else is required for that. Do I need to set up connectors, manage domains, add some address spaces? That might vary workload to workload. So you've got to have that general idea about how things fit together, how things map underneath M365. You've also got to think about the tools required for that. So in this example here, I've got the Exchange workload that I'm looking at, and I'm using Exchange hybrid tools to get that job done, to help me set up coexistence, because I'm not ready to move everything in one go. I want to set up some coexistence here because I might be doing a migration over a 6 month period or a 12-month period. So I want to have coexistence. So I'm going to use the Exchange hybrid tools there to help me do that. Okay, different products, different workloads have their own tools, their own ways of doing things. Find out what they are and what types of things are involved in doing those. Okay, next up, the applications. So your Microsoft 365 applications. How do users get those onto their desktops? How do people get Outlook, Word, and Excel onto their machines? Are they going to download that from the portal? Do they know about the portal? How do we tell them where to go? Do we download those binaries to the network and install them from there? Maybe you're using SCCM for application deployment right now, and you'd like to continue using that and deploy your Office applications using SCCM. That's absolutely fine. You can do that. But you need to get the downloads done first to the network and then use custom scripts to help build out how you want it deployed. So you're going to be looking at things like the Office deployment tool here to help you with that. Or maybe you're happy for the users just to connect online and download the binaries themselves and have it automatically managed and updated that way by Microsoft. You've got to think about license activation and stuff like this as well. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at some basic settings. Do we allow users to download the apps? Do we allow it for PC, for Mac, for both? There are some simple buttons like this we can push, but you need to go a bit deeper. You need to look into things like Office deployment tool if you're installing from a network share, for example. And so here's a question on that. You plan to deploy Office applications to your Windows 10 computers, but you're not ready to deploy OneDrive for Business until internal testing is complete. You need to install all other Office desktop applications to the Windows 10 computers. How should you deploy the applications? I think people mostly are saying B. You're recommending that I download the Office deployment tool. Are you right? Yes, you are. Okay, because you can do a custom install that takes away some of the components. You don't have to download the entire suite. You can cherry pick which applications you want. So well done. You're going to smash this exam. Yeah, perfect. The other ones, just to give you some ideas there, instruct the users to connect to admin.microsoft.com/blah, blah, blah. That's where they would normally go if you say, go to the portal, or here's a link. You can share a link over email. That takes them to their subscription where they can pull down the bits themselves. They don't need you to push it out to them at all. They can pull that down over the web. The software download settings is what I just showed you a second ago. So that's just, is it on or off for PC or Mac? So that's pretty straightforward. Configure device access in the OneDrive Admin Center. Bit of a, well, that definitely exists, but that's not going to help. We're specifically talking about not installing the OneDrive binaries on people's computers. We don't want to then think about blocking them in OneDrive settings. We just don't want the binaries on their computers in the first place. So a custom install is going to be the way to go. Office deployment tool. Well done. Okay, some of you are going to nail this exam. I can feel it already. So let's use a few minutes then to think about, right, we've learned the OD. What do I do next? How do I start preparing? So remember, this exam is not out yet, but it will be in just a few weeks. So you should be starting to think already about preparation. I hope that's why you're here. So lots of things you can use. Going forwards, as of this week, we've got courses available. We've got online courses, training courses that you can attend in Learning Partners. You're going to want to start checking that out. A lot of this has been designed as micro-learning. So when I showed you that sort of subway map earlier on, maybe you choose to do one of those as an instructor-led course. Maybe you take one of them as a Pluralsight course, and maybe you take one of them as online micro-learning. That's absolutely fine. You can mix and match these days. You don't have to sit in a 5-day class in a training center. But equally, you never have to go to a training center either. Maybe you do a LinkedIn Learning course to cover all of this information, or bits of it you might already know. And that's great, because some of you will come from a background of Office 365 or Windows 10, so you might know those areas already. And you just need to fill in some gaps. This new model lends itself much better to that, so you don't have to sit there attending a course and 3 days were irrelevant to you. You can just do the parts that are relevant. Yeah, please come up and use the mic if you have a question.
So are you saying that LinkedIn Learning, Pluralsight, those learning partners have established courses that will cover
they will have
the entirety of this?
The plan is they will have. I'm not saying they're there right now because we've only just announced this week, but watch this space. That's the plan. Yep, we know they're working on it. I don't know when they're going to land, but we've already got the Microsoft courses available, but we expect the other ones to come pretty soon. On Learn, Evelyn, Evelyn can talk to more of that actually at the end if you don't mind, because I know we've got the courses, instructor-led courses. Do we have those online as well, Evelyn? I haven't looked. Please go ahead. So Evelyn's here from Microsoft as well. She's in charge of course content, so she can answer that question much better than I can.
So what's available? Is this Microsoft?
So what's on Microsoft.com/learn today is the question.
So as far as I understand it, there isn't Microsoft 365 content available yet on WAC Learn, but the plan is to put content up there, and that will be available for free. What is available today is content that's available to our learning partners. So that's both self-paced or online and instructor-led training. So if you go to your favorite local training provider, they'll be able to give you training immediately. Otherwise, the other content will be coming out over time.
Thank you, Evelyn. Right, good question. So watch this space. We've only just announced this certification and these exams. Well, it's Wednesday, right? 2 days ago. So give everyone a time to catch up, all right? Everyone's new to this, but those will be coming. Everyone's sort of committing to creating content for that. But yes, at the moment, just learning partners have that training content available to offer, but we're going to be filling in some gaps. Yes, sir, another question.
Yeah, I had a question if these exams are based off E5 licensing.
That's a good question. So assume the highest possible SKUs and the maximum possible tools as a result. So I would definitely assume for that. Put it another way, if Microsoft only created an exam based on M365 Business, well, then there'd be a whole bunch of people screaming out, well, when are we getting tested on the enterprise features then? So yes, from a preparation perspective, you'd most definitely want to assume the highest possible feature set, the highest possible SKUs. So you're assuming M365 Enterprise E5 type licenses for sure, okay? If you don't physically have that as an organization, get to a learning partner. If you've got access to it, demos.microsoft.com, find another way, or just do lots and lots of reading. But you should assume that for sure, yes. Yes, another question, gentlemen.
Yeah, I was just curious where this lines up with 70, 346, and 347.
Good question. So the numbers you quoted there are the Office 365 exams that are already in market now. You will find a healthy overlap if you've done those. Have you done those yourself, sir? No, not yet. Okay. There's an overlap because part of M365, of course, like I showed you, is Office 365, but it's not just that. So this is like a reimagining. This is a new, we're not trying to say that Office 365 is irrelevant. Lots of people will only have an Office 365 subscription. But we're approaching this from the point of view of you're going to have a Microsoft 365 subscription, so we do need to test on a wider range of technologies, Windows, Office 365, EMS, and everything else. So if you've done those tests, if you've done that learning for Office 365, or likewise, if you've done training for EMS or for Windows 10, you're going to already have a leg on that ladder. You're already going to be a rung or two up that learning ladder. You won't be starting from zero. But if you're asking, should I abandon my training on that, and I was going to take those exams tomorrow, should I still do them? My advice would be yes, definitely, because they're still going to be on your transcript. They're still going to show that you've done those. But this is a slightly different, it's a wider feature set. So please carry on and do those if you're close to finishing, is my advice. Get those done, get those badges, get those certifications. It's not going to harm you to have more things on your transcript. Okay? All right, I'll take some more questions in a second. Let's just finish off the last couple of slides. So additional resources. You should now find this exam is published online. Been dying to say that for weeks, but that's now available online. So if you go to microsoft.com/learning, there is an MS-100 exam page where you can review the things we've been talking about at your leisure. You can also see that there are going to be study groups there, so please collaborate with one another. This has only just gone live, but please start sharing your experiences with one another. You're going to be able to help and learn from each other. Study groups really, really work. I'm a member of several myself, and you get answers from other people that you didn't even realize were questions in your own head until you read them. So definitely collaborate, help each other, share your stories, good and bad on there. Do use the docs.microsoft.com resource. It's awesome. If ever I need to look something up, that's always the place I go if it's not already in my head. I know it's going to be an authoritative source of information. It's very rich, and tons of this is documented. I don't think there's anything that's not documented. You can learn loads from here if you're prepared to sit there and read it. Okay, so if you don't want to go to a training course, or the training courses aren't ready yet for you, you can start learning today, okay, as well as the other Ignite sessions, of course. Tips and tricks, and you preempted me with your question, sir, so thank you for that. Yeah, you've got to have hands-on experience, okay? You've got to have used M365 before. You've got to know your way around, what admin centers you're likely to want to use, and what things out of each admin center. You've got to have some knowledge of those workloads too, okay? At least the basics. You don't need to be a SharePoint expert, and a OneDrive expert, and an Exchange expert, and a Teams expert, but you've got to have a good working knowledge of those things, and where we feed in as enterprise admins, what things we will be configuring that have an impact on those workloads, like setting up domains and setting up, that sort of thing. Bear in mind that this is a brand new job role. We've only just announced it today. Some of you put your hands up at the beginning and said, hey, I actually do this as part of my job. Great. Many of you in the room might have this job title in a year's time. So this is new for a lot of you. Stick to the job description here that we're calling out when you're approaching your study, when you're approaching your exams, even if that doesn't match your own job title today. Think like an enterprise admin and you'll be one. Does that make sense? So you want to start looking at it that way through the eyes of a global admin, even if you don't have that privilege and you don't have that right, in your subscriptions right now. Assume you are looking after, an M365 E5 plan. That's where I should definitely go from a study point of view. So take action then. A few things we'd like to think about then. We don't have practice tests yet for this exam because we don't even have the exam. But there are tons of practice tests available in the hands-on labs areas. We've got some new Azure ones in there. And just like Office 365 exams the gentleman was talking about, we've got practice tests for those. Certification on site this week is 50% off. If you're taking any of the Azure transition exams, they're even cheaper still at $49. So well worth looking at those. Please come and have a conversation with us, either at the certification area where we book the tests, or in the expo hall. There's other trainers and Microsoft staff around to answer any questions you have on all this new stuff. It can be a bit confusing when it's all new and you're still digesting it. So if you want to come and talk to us tomorrow about that, please drop by and have a conversation. Everything we've talked about here, you can start learning about on aka.ms/mscert as well. That's a good landing page to get you started. I've got some cards here if you want to have a quick look at that subway map that we talked about. I've got some cards here that explain that visually, so if you want to take those away, come and grab one of those at the end as well. And one other thing, we have already done the MS-101 cert prep this week. If you missed it, of course it was recorded, so you can watch that back at your own leisure. And I'm also going to be doing a deeper dive on that roadmap in a theatre session tomorrow. So I'm going to be in, I think it's Theatre 9, but that's on the expo floor. That's the certification and training roadmap, Microsoft 365. There's a 20-minute theatre session tomorrow. We'll spend some more time talking about the background to this and this whole job roles thing too. So hopefully you can find time to come along to that one too. Are there any questions? We have a few minutes left. Please come up to the mics. So we've got you on the recording, please.
So the question is regarding the practice test. So
Yes.
how do we go about doing that after the Ignite? Is there a way we can,
Okay,
is there a place?
good question. So once the exams have left beta, which they're not even in beta yet, but once they've left beta and they're then properly live, there will be practice tests available that are created by measurup.com.
Okay.
So I'd love to say, hey, they're there today, but it's just so early in the process. The actual exams and the practice exams have yet to be written. They're not ready yet. Okay. So there's going to be a few weeks before those are available, but measurup.com will have them. And you can actually buy those as you're scheduling your exam as well. They bundled those into the exam checkout process. So you can buy both the real test and the practice test all in one go.
Okay, it's measurup.com.
Measurup.com are the practice tests. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi. Will there be any upgrade paths to this if you have an MCSE in public cloud or MCSI in Office 365?
There's nothing planned at this time. All we have so far is the two that we've announced right now. I genuinely don't know. I haven't been told that, yes or no. So I don't have anything I can tell you on that. I would expect not, personally, but I don't work for Microsoft, so I can't give you a definitive on that. All we've announced right now is that we've got the M365. That's definitely going to happen. We know these MS-101s and MS-100s are definitely coming out. We'll definitely have practice tests for those. We also know that the modern desktop associate qualification will be out very, very soon as well, soon to follow. But there's a whole ton of stuff that's coming down the pipeline. I don't have insight into all of that, so I can't give you a straight yes, no. But watch this space, folks, because there's a lot of other stuff that's planned that will come on here. This roadmap will look entirely different in 6 months' time. There's going to be lots of new announcements coming, so watch this space. Okay? Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much, folks. Thanks for coming. You'll want to definitely watch this recording back and press pause on it various times when you're studying, so please make sure you do that. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with your exams in the future.